Dad, I paid off your mortgage. I'm selling this house and you're moving to a nursing home. End of discussion. My name is Frank Williams. I'm 73 years old. And those words came out of my own son's mouth like he was talking to some stranger on the street. Not like he was talking to the man who raised him, who worked his whole life to give that boy everything he ever needed. Listen, this story is gonna shake you right to your bones. Stick with me till the end, share this with someone who needs to hear it, and tell me what city you're watching this video from. Because what my son thought was gonna be his biggest power move, well, it turned out to be the biggest mistake of his life. It was a Tuesday morning, around 10 o'clock, when Michael walked through my front door without even knocking. Just walked right in like he owned the place. Which, according to the papers he was carrying in that fancy briefcase of his, apparently he thought he did now. I was sitting in my kitchen having my morning coffee and reading the newspaper like I do every day. Same routine I've had for the past 47 years in this house. Same kitchen table where his mother used to make breakfast every morning before work. Same chair where I taught him how to read the sports section when he was 8 years old. But the man standing in my doorway wasn't that 8-year-old boy anymore. This was Michael Williams, attorney at law, in his $1,500 suit and his imported leather shoes that probably cost more than most people make in a month. His hair was slicked back with some kind of gel that made him look like one of those politicians you see on TV, the kind you just don't trust. "Morning, Dad," he said, not even bothering to sit down. Just stood there looking around my kitchen like he was inspecting a property he was thinking about buying, which, I guess, in a way, he was. "Michael," I said, folding my newspaper, "what brings you by so early? You usually don't visit unless it's Christmas or someone's birthday." He pulled out a chair and finally sat down, but he kept that briefcase on his lap like he was afraid I might steal it. "I need to talk to you about your financial situation. Now, I don't know about you, but when someone starts a conversation talking about your money, especially when that someone is family, well, that's never a good sign." I set my coffee cup down real careful-like and looked at my son. Really looked at him. When had his eyes gotten so cold? When had he started looking at me like I was some kind of burden? "What about my financial situation?" I asked. "Dad, I know you're struggling. I know you've been behind on the mortgage payments. I know you've been cutting corners, eating soup for dinner more nights than not." That hit me right in the gut. Not because it wasn't true. Hell, times had been tough lately. But because of the way he said it. Like he was disappointed in me. Like I was some kind of failure. "How do you know about my mortgage payments?" I asked. "I have my ways," he said, opening that briefcase and pulling out a stack of papers. "The point is, I took care of it. The house is paid off. Clean slate." Aovi, for just a second, just one moment, I felt this wave of relief wash over me. Maybe my boy did care after all. Maybe he was looking out for his old man. Maybe I'd been wrong about those cold eyes. But then he kept talking. "I'm putting the house on the market next week." The relief died right there in my chest. Just died cold. "What did you say?" "You heard me, Dad. I'm selling the house. I already talked to a realtor. Market's good right now. We should get a decent price." "We?" I said, and I could hear my voice getting harder. "Since when is this house we?" Michael sighed like I was some stubborn child who wasn't understanding basic math. "Dad, look around. This place is too big for you. You're rattling around here like a marble in a shoebox. You can barely keep up with the maintenance. The yard's overgrown. The gutters need cleaning. And don't even get me started on that leaky faucet in the upstairs bathroom that you've been meaning to fix for the past 2 years." Every word was like a little knife. Because yeah, the yard wasn't perfect anymore. Yeah, there were things around the house that needed attention. But this was my home. This was where I built my life. "This is where you grew up," I said quietly. "I know that, Dad. But I'm an adult now. I have my own home. I don't need this place for the memories. What about me? What about what I need?" That's when he said it. The thing that changed everything between us forever. "Dad, you're 73 years old. You shuffle around this house like a ghost. You talk to pictures on the wall. You set 2 places at the dinner table when it's just you. You need professional care. Professional care. Like I was some broken machine that needed fixing. I don't want to go to a nursing home. It's not about what you want anymore, he said, and his voice got that lawyer tone, all business and no heart. I'm your son. I'm making the responsible decision here. He pulled out more papers from that briefcase. Documents with official seals and fancy letterhead. I've already looked into several facilities. There's a nice place about 20 minutes from here. Clean, well-staffed, good reviews. They have activities, meal plans, medical staff on site 24 hours a day. You've already looked into it? The words came out like I was choking on them. Dad, I'm a lawyer. I plan ahead. I do my research. This is the smart move. The smart move for who? For everyone involved. The house will sell for probably around $400,000, maybe more if we get lucky. After I recoup what I paid on the mortgage and the realtor fees, there'll be enough left over to cover the nursing home costs for several years. After you recoup what you paid. That's right, I didn't pay off your mortgage out of the goodness of my heart, Dad. That was an investment, a business decision. And there it was. The truth. Finally out in the open. I stood up slowly from my chair. My knees creaked a little. They always do in the morning. And I saw Michael notice it. Saw him nod to himself like my creaky knees proved his point about me being too old to take care of myself. Let me get this straight, I said. You paid off my mortgage without asking me. Now you're selling my house without asking me. And you're putting me in a nursing home without asking me. Dad, and you're treating this whole thing like some kind of business transaction. Because that's what it is, he said, standing up too. Look, I know this is hard. Change is always hard. But sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions. Adults. Like I wasn't one. Like being 73 meant I'd somehow stopped being a grown man who could make his own choices. I want you to leave, I said. Dad, don't be unreasonable. I said leave. Michael closed his briefcase with a sharp snap. Fine, but I'm coming back tomorrow with the realtor. This is happening whether you like it or not. Start packing. He walked toward the front door, then stopped and turned back to look at me. For just a second I thought maybe he was going to apologize. Maybe he was going to remember that he was talking to his father, not some client he was trying to bulldoze. Instead he said, Dad, I know you think I'm the bad guy here, but someday you'll understand that I'm doing this because I love you. Then he left. Just walked out my front door and drove away in his shiny black BMW, leaving me standing alone in my kitchen with the taste of betrayal bitter in my mouth. I sat back down at my kitchen table and looked around. 47 years in this house. 47 years of memories built into these walls. The growth chart penciled on the doorframe where we measured Michael every birthday. The dent in the wall from when he learned to ride his bike indoors during a rainstorm. The family photos covering every surface. But you know what I wasn't doing? I wasn't feeling sorry for myself. I wasn't crying into my coffee. Because Michael made one crucial mistake. He thought his old man was just going to roll over and take it. And that, my friend, was about to cost him everything. After Michael left, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I went upstairs to the bedroom and opened the closet that I'd kept locked for the past 8 months. Martha's side of the closet. Her clothes were still hanging there exactly like she left them. Her blue dress with the little flowers that she wore to church every Sunday. Her winter coat that smelled like her perfume. And in the back, behind her good shoes, was a small wooden box that she'd made me promise never to open unless something like this happened. I sat on the edge of our bed. My bed now, I guess, and held that box in my hands. Martha had given it to me about a year before she got sick. She sat right here, right in this same spot, and looked me dead in the eye. Frank, she'd said, I know you think you're protecting me by keeping certain things from your past buried. But honey, if something ever happens to me, if I'm not here to help you fight whatever battles come your way, you're gonna need everything in that box. I'd tried to argue with her then. Told her nothing was gonna happen to her. Told her we were gonna grow old together, sitting on the front porch, watching our grandkids play in the yard. But Martha, she always was smarter than me. always saw things coming before I did. "Promise me," she'd said. "Promise me you'll only open it if you really need it. If someone tries to take everything we built together." I'd promised. And now here I was, 8 months after we buried her, holding that promise in my hands. Inside the box were things I thought I'd never need again. Things from a time in my life when Frank Williams wasn't just some retired old man shuffling around a too-big house. Back when Frank Williams was somebody people respected. And sometimes, when they needed to, people feared. There was a business card, yellowed with age, for a man named Jimmy Santos. On the back, in Martha's careful handwriting, it said, "He owes you his life. Don't forget that." There was a photograph of me and 3 other men, all of us much younger, standing outside a warehouse in Detroit. We were all wearing suits, all smiling, but if you looked close enough, you could see something hard in our eyes. Something that said we weren't just businessmen. And there was a letter. A letter I'd written to Martha 45 years ago but never gave her. A letter explaining exactly who I was before I became her husband, before I became Michael's father, before I decided to leave that life behind and become the kind of man who deserved a woman like her. I read that letter sitting on my bed, in the house my son wanted to steal from me, and I remembered things I'd spent decades trying to forget. See, back in the late 70s and early 80s, I wasn't Frank Williams, the family man. I was Frank Williams who worked for the Torino family, not as muscle. I was never the type to go around breaking legs or anything like that. I was what they called a facilitator. When the family needed something done quietly, when they needed problems to disappear, when they needed someone who could make things happen without leaving fingerprints, they called me. I was good at it. Real good. Good enough that when I decided I wanted out, when I met Martha and realized I wanted a different kind of life, Don Torino himself sat down with me in his office and shook my hand. "Frank," he'd said, "you've been loyal. You've been smart. You've never caused me any problems. So when you walk out that door, you walk out clean. No one bothers you. No one bothers your family. You get to be a regular citizen. I appreciate that, Don. But," he'd said, leaning back in his chair, "if you ever need anything at all, you call." That was 43 years ago. 43 years of being just Frank Williams the husband, Frank Williams the father, Frank Williams the guy who worked construction during the day and coached Little League on weekends. 43 years of keeping that part of my life buried so deep that sometimes I almost forgot it existed. But my son's little visit today? That changed everything. I picked up the business card and looked at Jimmy Santos's number. Jimmy was my closest friend during those years. We'd started out together. 2 kids from the neighborhood who thought they were tough enough to run with the big boys. We'd saved each other's backs more times than I could count. And the last job we did together, the one that went sideways and almost got us both killed. I'd made a choice that saved Jimmy's life but cost me everything I'd built up in that world. I never asked him to pay me back, never even brought it up. But Jimmy, he was the type of man who remembered his debts. The type who'd drop everything if an old friend called in a favor. I walked downstairs to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of the good whiskey. The bottle Martha bought me for my 70th birthday, the one I'd been saving for a special occasion. Well, I figured this qualified. Then I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in 15 years. It rang 3 times before a gravelly voice answered. "Yeah? Jimmy Santos?" There was a pause. A long pause. Then, Jesus Christ, Frank Williams. "Hello, Jimmy." "Frank, you son of a bitch. I thought you were dead. Haven't heard from you since Martha's wedding anniversary party. That was what, 15 years ago? 16. Listen, Jimmy, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be straight with me. Are you still connected?" Another pause. Depends on who's asking and why they want to know. It's just me asking, and I'm asking because I might need some help. Jimmy's voice got serious. "What kind of help?" "The kind you used to be good at. Information, leverage, making problems go away." "Frank, what the hell is going on? Last I heard you were living the quiet life, retired, playing grandpa. I was, but my son decided he wants to play hardball with the wrong old man. Jimmy started laughing. Not a happy laugh, but the kind of laugh that said he understood exactly what that meant. Your boy doesn't know who his daddy used to be, does he? No, and I've spent 43 years making sure of that. But now you're thinking it might be time for him to get an education. I looked around my kitchen, at the family photos on the refrigerator, at the coffee cup Michael had drunk from just hours ago, at the life I'd built here with Martha, the life my son thought he could just take away from me. Jimmy, my boy thinks he can force me out of my home, thinks he can put me in some nursing home and sell everything I've worked for, thinks because I'm 73 years old, I'm helpless. And you want to show him different. I want to remind him that respect goes both ways. That just because a man gets older doesn't mean he gets weaker. What do you need? I need you to look into Michael Williams, attorney, works downtown at Preston, Beck and Associates. I need to know everything about him. His business dealings, his clients, his finances, everything. How deep you want me to dig? I took a sip of that good whiskey and felt it burn all the way down. All the way, Jimmy, all the way down. Frank, you sure about this? Once I start digging, once we go down this road, there's no going back to being just a regular grandpa. I thought about that for a minute. Thought about Martha and what she'd want. Thought about the man I'd been and the man I'd tried to become. Thought about my son standing in my kitchen this morning, talking to me like I was nothing. Jimmy, my son made his choice when he walked into my house and tried to steal my life. Now I'm making mine. Give me 48 hours, Jimmy said. I'll call you back with everything I find. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and finished my whiskey. Outside, I could hear kids playing in the street, probably getting home from school. Normal sounds from a normal neighborhood where normal people lived normal lives. But I wasn't feeling very normal anymore. For the first time in 43 years, Frank Williams was about to remember exactly who he used to be. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. 5:30 in the morning, to be exact. Old habits, I guess. Back in the day when I was working for the Torino family, 5:30 was when you got your best thinking done. Before the world woke up and started making noise. Before people started asking questions you didn't want to answer. I made my coffee and sat at the kitchen table just like every other morning for the past 47 years. But this morning felt different. This morning, I wasn't just Frank Williams the retiree. I was Frank Williams who was about to go to war with his own son. Around 7 o'clock, I heard a car pull into my driveway. I looked out the window and saw Michael's BMW, followed by a white sedan I didn't recognize. He was early. Probably thought he'd catch me off guard. Still in my bathrobe, confused and scared about what was happening to me. He was half right. I was still in my bathrobe, but confused and scared? Not so much. Michael got out of his car wearing another one of those expensive suits. Dark blue this time, with a red tie that probably cost more than most people spend on groceries in a month. A woman got out of the white sedan, mid-40s, blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, carrying a briefcase that looked just as expensive as Michael's. Had to be the realtor. They walked up to my front door together, and I could hear them talking through the window. Just remember, Michael was saying, he's old and stubborn. He doesn't understand that this is for his own good. If he gives you any trouble, just let me handle it. Does he have any other family? The woman asked. Other children? Anyone who might contest the sale? No, it's just me. I'm his only son, and I have power of attorney for his finances. That stopped me cold. Power of attorney? When the hell did I give him power of attorney? They knocked on the door, and I took my time answering. Let them stand out there in the cold for a minute while I thought about what Michael had just said. Power of attorney meant he could make financial decisions for me. Meant he could sign papers on my behalf. Meant he really could sell my house, whether I wanted him to or not. I opened the door and looked at my son. Morning, Michael. Dad, this is Rebecca Patterson from Patterson Real Estate. She's here to look at the house and give us a market evaluation. Rebecca stepped forward with one of those professional smiles that real estate agents practice in the mirror. Mr. Williams, it's so nice to meet you. Michael's told me so much about you. Has he now? I said, not moving from the doorway. And what exactly has he told you? She glanced at Michael, probably wondering why I wasn't inviting them in. He mentioned that you're looking to downsize, move into a more manageable living situation. Is that what he said? Dad, Michael said, his voice getting that lawyer tone again. Can we come in? Rebecca needs to see the house so she can give us an accurate assessment. I stepped aside and let them in, but I didn't offer them coffee or ask them to sit down. I just stood there in my bathrobe and slippers, watching this woman walk around my home like she was already mentally redecorating it. Oh, this is lovely, Rebecca said, looking around the living room. Original hardwood floors and these built-in bookcases are gorgeous. The crown molding is beautiful too. This has so much character. Character. Like my house was some kind of museum piece instead of a home where real people had lived real lives. How many bedrooms? She asked Michael. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths. The master bedroom is upstairs, along with 2 other bedrooms. There's a 4th bedroom downstairs that we used as an office. Like he still lived here? Like this was still his home too. Rebecca was taking notes on some kind of tablet, occasionally snapping pictures with her phone. She walked through my dining room, where Martha and I had eaten dinner together every night for 47 years. She poked her head into the kitchen, where I'd taught Michael how to make pancakes when he was 10 years old. She wandered through the family room, where we'd watched him graduate high school on a grainy VHS recording because we couldn't afford to take time off work to attend the ceremony. Mr. Williams, Rebecca said, have you given any thought to timing? When would you like to put the house on the market? I haven't given it any thought at all, I said, because I'm not selling my house. Another one of those glances between her and Michael, like I was some confused old man who didn't understand what was happening. Dad, Michael said, we talked about this yesterday. This is happening. Actually, son, what happened yesterday was you came into my home and told me what you thought was going to happen. That's not the same thing as us talking about it. Rebecca cleared her throat. Perhaps I should step outside for a moment and let you two discuss this privately. That's not necessary, Michael said. My father is having a difficult time accepting change. It's normal for people his age. People his age. Like I was some kind of category instead of a person. Like being 73 meant I'd lost the right to have opinions about my own life. Michael, I said, and my voice came out harder than I intended. When did I give you power of attorney? He looked surprised that I'd heard him talking outside. Dad, you signed the papers 3 months ago. Don't you remember? You were having trouble with the bills, and I said I'd help you manage your finances. 3 months ago. That would have been right after Martha's funeral. Right when I was drowning in grief and medical bills and couldn't think straight about anything. When I was so lost without her that I would have signed anything someone put in front of me. I remember signing something, I said slowly, but I thought it was just to help with the insurance paperwork. It was a general power of attorney, Dad, for your financial affairs. I thought it would be easier if I could handle things for you. Easier for who? I wanted to ask. But I didn't say it. Not with the realtor standing there taking notes about every word we said. Rebecca finished her walkthrough and came back to the living room. Well, it's a beautiful home, great bones, wonderful location. I think in today's market we're looking at somewhere between $450,000 and $500,000. $500,000. For the house where I'd raised my son, where I'd loved my wife, where I'd built the only life that had ever mattered to me. How quickly could we get it listed? Michael asked. I could have it on the market by Friday. We'll need some professional photos, maybe stage a few rooms, but it shouldn't take long. Houses in this neighborhood are moving fast. Perfect, Michael said. Dad, why don't you start thinking about what you want to take with you to the nursing home? They have size restrictions on personal belongings. Size restrictions. Like my whole life could be packed into whatever fit their rules. After they left, I sat back down at my kitchen table and thought about what Michael had said. Power of attorney. That changed things. That meant he really could sell my house. Meant he really could put me in a nursing home. Meant maybe I was as helpless as he thought I was. But then I remembered something Martha used to say. When I got discouraged about work or money, or any of the 100 little problems that come with building a life together. Frank, she'd say, there's always more than one way to skin a cat. You just have to be smart enough to find it. I walked over to the phone and called Jimmy Santos. Frank, he said when he picked up, I was just about to call you. I've been digging into your boy's business, and let me tell you, Michael's got some very interesting friends. What kind of friends? The kind who wouldn't want certain information about their business dealings to become public knowledge. The kind who pay good money to keep lawyers quiet about their affairs. You found something. Oh, I found a lot of things, Frank. Your son's been a very busy man. Very creative with his client relationships. Very flexible with his interpretation of legal ethics. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Jimmy, are you telling me my son is crooked? I'm telling you your son has been making some choices that certain people might consider questionable. And those people have very deep pockets and very strong preferences for privacy. How bad is it? Bad enough that if the right information ended up in the wrong hands, Michael Williams would lose a lot more than his law license. I thought about my son standing in my living room this morning, talking about me like I was some kind of burden. Thought about him signing papers to sell my house without asking me. Thought about him putting me in a nursing home with size restrictions on personal belongings. Jimmy, I said, I think it's time my son learned that his old man still has a few tricks up his sleeve. What do you want me to do? I looked around my kitchen one more time, at the family photos, at the coffee cup Michael had used, at everything he thought he could just take away from me. I want you to remind him that respect goes both ways. That afternoon, Jimmy Santos showed up at my front door carrying a manila envelope thick enough to choke a horse. He looked older than I remembered, more gray in his hair, more lines around his eyes, but he still had that same walk. The kind of walk that said he'd seen things and done things that most people only read about in newspapers. Frank, he said, stepping into my living room, you might want to sit down for this. I poured us both a glass of that good whiskey, and Jimmy spread the contents of that envelope across my coffee table like he was dealing cards. Photos, bank statements, phone records, copies of legal documents. The kind of paperwork that told a story nobody wanted told. Your boy's been busy, Jimmy said, picking up a photograph of Michael shaking hands with a man I didn't recognize. You know who that is? I looked at the photo. It was taken outside some fancy restaurant downtown. Michael was smiling that lawyer smile of his, but the other man looked serious, dangerous even. Never seen him before in my life. Tony Marconi. He runs most of the construction rackets on the south side. Garbage collection, trucking, concrete contracts. All very legitimate businesses if you don't look too close at how he gets those city contracts. Jimmy pulled out another photo. Same restaurant, different night. Michael again, but this time with a woman in an expensive dress. Maria Santos, no relation to me, by the way. She handles the money laundering for 3 different crime families. Very good at making dirty money look clean, very expensive, and very, very careful about who she works with. What does this have to do with Michael? Your son represents both of them, among others. See, Michael's not just any lawyer, Frank. He's what they call a bridge attorney. He specializes in making connections between legitimate businesses and not so legitimate enterprises. He helps clean money look cleaner. He helps dirty deals look legal. Jimmy spread out more documents. Bank statements showing massive cash deposits into accounts with Michael's name on them. Legal contracts that looked official but had language that didn't quite make sense unless you knew what you were really looking at. Look at this, Jimmy said, pointing to a series of transactions. In the past 18 months, your son has moved over $3 million through various shell companies. Always staying just under the reporting thresholds. Always keeping things complicated enough that it would take a team of federal accountants months to trace where the money really came from. $3 million. I thought about Michael standing in my kitchen, talking about how he'd invested in paying off my mortgage, how it was a business decision. Is it enough to get him arrested? Jimmy shook his head. Michael's smart. Everything he's doing is technically legal. Morally questionable, ethically borderline, but legal. He's walking right up to the line without crossing it. Then how does this help me? Because there's one thing your boy didn't count on. One thing that could bring his whole operation crashing down. Jimmy pulled out a single sheet of paper. It looked like a contract, but the names had been blacked out except for one signature at the bottom. Michael's signature. What am I looking at? A retainer agreement, signed 6 months ago. Your son agreed to represent a client in some very sensitive financial transactions. Transactions that involved moving money through offshore accounts to avoid federal oversight. That sounds illegal. It is illegal. Very illegal. But Michael thought he was protected because his client told him the money was from legitimate sources. Real estate investments, technology ventures, import-export business. But it wasn't. The money was from drug trafficking. Specifically, from a cartel operation that's been moving product through the Great Lakes shipping routes. The FBI has been tracking this money for 2 years. I felt something cold settle in my chest. Jimmy, are you telling me my son is laundering drug money? I'm telling you your son thinks he's laundering legitimate money that happens to be complicated. But if certain people found out what that money really was, if certain federal agencies got interested in your son's client list, he'd go to prison. For a very long time. And so would everyone he's been helping. Which means Tony Marconi and Maria Santos and about a dozen other very dangerous people would have a very strong interest in making sure Michael Williams never got the chance to testify about anything. Jimmy leaned back in his chair and took a sip of whiskey. Your son's walking a tightrope, Frank. He just doesn't know it yet. I looked at all the papers spread across my coffee table. My son's entire secret life laid out in black and white. All his clever schemes, all his careful planning, all his expensive suits paid for with money that came from places he didn't want to think about. What do you need from me? I asked. Nothing yet. Right now, Michael's protected by ignorance. As long as he doesn't know what his client really does. As long as he can claim he thought the money was clean, he's probably safe. Probably. But if he found out, he'd have 2 choices. Report his client to the authorities and hope federal protection keeps him alive long enough to testify. Or keep quiet and hope nobody ever connects him to the drug money. And if someone else found out? Someone who wasn't Michael? Jimmy smiled, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. Well, that would depend on who found out and what they wanted to do with the information. I understood. This wasn't just about having dirt on Michael. This was about having the kind of information that could destroy him completely. The kind of information that could make him very, very eager to do whatever someone asked him to do. There's something else, Jimmy said, pulling out one more document. About that power of attorney you signed. What about it? It's not as ironclad as your son thinks it is. See, power of attorney is supposed to be for people who can't make their own decisions. People who are mentally incapacitated. Suffering from dementia, that kind of thing. But I'm not mentally incapacitated. Exactly. And if someone were to challenge that power of attorney in court, if they could prove that you were coerced into signing it while you were grieving, if they could show that you didn't understand what you were agreeing to, it could be revoked. It could be revoked. Especially if the person who convinced you to sign it had ulterior motives. Especially if that person stood to benefit financially from having control over your affairs. I thought about Michael coming to see me 3 months ago, right after Martha's funeral. I'd been so lost, so overwhelmed by everything. The medical bills, the funeral expenses, the insurance paperwork. When he offered to help, when he said he'd take care of everything, it had seemed like a blessing. Now I realized it had been a trap. Jimmy, how long have you known about Michael's business activities? I started looking into him yesterday after you called. But Frank, I gotta ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. What? How far are you willing to go with this? Because once we start using what I found, once we start applying pressure, there's no going back. Your relationship with your son, whatever's left of it, it's gonna be over. I looked around my living room, at the family photos on the mantle, at Martha's piano in the corner, at the life Michael wanted to tear apart so he could make some money and feel better about putting his father in a nursing home. Jimmy, Yesterday morning, my son walked into this house and told me he was selling it. He talked to me like I was some kind of burden he needed to get rid of. He made decisions about my life without asking me, and when I objected, he told me it didn't matter what I wanted. And now I think it's time my son learned that actions have consequences. That you don't get to treat people like they're disposable, even if they're old. Even if they're your father. Jimmy finished his whiskey and started putting the papers back in the envelope. What do you want me to do? I thought about Michael's voice when he said it wasn't about what I wanted anymore. Thought about him bringing that realtor into my home. Thought about him talking about size restrictions on personal belongings. I want you to arrange a meeting, somewhere private, somewhere we can have a conversation without interruptions. What kind of conversation? The kind where I remind my son that respect goes both ways, and where he learns that his old man isn't as helpless as he thinks. Jimmy stood up and headed for the door. I'll set it up. But Frank, once we do this, once we show him what we know, everything changes. Everything already changed, Jimmy. Yesterday morning, when my son decided I was nothing more than an obstacle to his plans. Fair enough, I'll call you tomorrow. After Jimmy left, I sat alone in my living room with that envelope full of my son's secrets. Outside, I could hear kids playing in the street again. Normal sounds from a normal neighborhood. But tomorrow, nothing was going to be normal anymore. Jimmy called me at 8 o'clock the next morning. It's set up, he said. Tonight. 7 o'clock. The old Riverside Diner on Miller Road. You remember the place? I remembered. Back in the day, the Riverside was where we used to meet when we needed to have conversations that couldn't happen in normal places. The kind of diner where the coffee was terrible, the food was worse, but the owner minded his own business and the booths in the back were far enough from the kitchen that you could talk without being overheard. Will he come? Oh, he'll come. I called his office this morning. Told his secretary that a potential client wanted to meet him about some very lucrative business opportunities. Mentioned that discretion was important and that the client preferred to meet somewhere informal. And he bought it. Frank, your son's got dollar signs in his eyes these days. He's not asking too many questions about where the money comes from. At 6:30 that evening, I put on my best suit. The same one I'd worn to Martha's funeral 8 months ago. It still smelled a little like her perfume from when she'd hugged me that last morning before the cancer finally took her. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and barely recognized the man staring back at me. For 43 years, I'd been Frank Williams, the family man. The guy who went to work every day, came home every night, coached Little League, and never missed a school play. But tonight, I was going to be someone different. Tonight, I was going to be the man I used to be before I met Martha. The man who knew how to handle people who thought they were smarter than everyone else. The Riverside Diner looked exactly the same as it had 15 years ago. Same cracked vinyl booths, same flickering neon sign, same smell of grease and cigarettes that never quite went away, no matter how many times they cleaned the place. I took a booth in the back corner and ordered coffee I had no intention of drinking. Michael showed up at exactly 7 o'clock, looking around the diner like he couldn't believe he was supposed to meet a client in such a dump. He was wearing another expensive suit, this one charcoal gray with a silver tie, and carrying that same briefcase he'd had when he came to steal my house. He spotted me in the back booth and his face went through about 3 different expressions. Confusion first, then annoyance, then something that might have been worry. Dad? What are you doing here? Sit down, Michael. I'm supposed to be meeting a client. I don't have time for I said sit down. Something in my voice must have gotten through to him because he slid into the booth across from me. Up close, I could see he looked tired, stressed, like maybe all that dirty money wasn't buying him as much peace of mind as he'd hoped. Dad, what's this about? How did you even know I'd be here? I reached into my jacket and pulled out the manila envelope Jimmy had given me. I set it on the table between us, right next to the salt and pepper shakers and the plastic container of sugar packets. Open it. What is it? Open it, Michael. He looked at the envelope like it might bite him, then slowly reached over and opened the flap. I watched his face as he pulled out the first photograph, the one of him shaking hands with Tony Marconi. His skin went pale, but he tried to keep his expression neutral. I don't know what you think this is. Keep looking. He pulled out the second photo. The bank statements, the contracts. With each piece of paper, he got a little paler, a little quieter. By the time he got to the retainer agreement with the drug money signature, his hands were shaking. Dad, I can explain. No need to explain, son. I understand perfectly. You're laundering money for drug dealers. You just don't know it yet. Michael's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. That's not... I don't... The client who signed that retainer? The one paying you all that money to move funds through offshore accounts? He's not in real estate, Michael. He's not in technology. He's in the business of moving cocaine and heroin through the Great Lakes shipping routes. You're lying. Am I? You want to call Tony Marconi and ask him? You want to call Maria Santos and see what she says about where her money really comes from? Michael slumped back in the booth like all the air had gone out of him. How do you know about this? I know a lot of things, son. I know that you've been very careful to stay just inside the law. I know that you think you're protected by ignorance. And I know that if certain federal agencies found out about your client list, you'd be looking at 25 to life in federal prison. What do you want? For the first time since this whole mess started, my son was asking me what I wanted instead of telling me what was going to happen. I want you to tear up that power of attorney. Dad, I want you to call that realtor and tell her the house is off the market. You don't understand. And I want you to apologize for treating me like I was some burden you needed to get rid of. Michael looked around the diner like he was hoping someone would come rescue him. But it was just him and me and 43 years of choices that had led us to this moment. If I do what you're asking, he said quietly, will you keep this information to yourself? I leaned forward and looked my son straight in the eye. Michael, that depends entirely on how much respect you show me from now on. Chael sat there for a long time, staring down at those papers like they were a death sentence, which, in a way, they were. The death of whatever fantasy he'd been living about being some hotshot lawyer who was smarter than everyone else. Dad, he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. How long have you known? Long enough. And you? You had me investigated? I had you looked into, yes. Turns out when you threaten to steal a man's home and put him in a nursing home, he starts asking questions about who exactly he raised. Michael's hands were still shaking as he tried to put the papers back in the envelope. He was being careful not to crumple anything, like maybe if he handled the evidence gently enough, it would all just disappear. The power of attorney, he said. You want me to tear it up? That's right. Dad, you signed that document voluntarily. You were having trouble managing your finances after Mom died, and I was trying to help. You were trying to help yourself to my house. That's not how it was. I leaned back in the booth and studied my son's face. Even now, even caught red-handed with evidence of crimes that could put him away for decades, he was still trying to convince me that he'd been doing me a favor. Michael, let me ask you something. When you paid off my mortgage, when you got that power of attorney, when you called that realtor, at any point in this process did you ask me what I wanted? You weren't thinking clearly. You were grieving. That's not what I asked. I asked if you ever, even once, asked me what I wanted. He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it again. We both knew the truth. The realtor, I said. Call her. Dad, call her. Right now. Tell her the house is off the market. Michael pulled out his phone with the same enthusiasm most people reserve for dental surgery. He dialed a number and waited. Rebecca, it's Michael Williams. Yes, about my father's house. There's been a change of plans. No, we're taking it off the market. Yes, I understand about the listing agreement. I'll pay the cancellation fee. Yes, I'm sure. He hung up and looked at me like he was waiting for approval. The power of attorney, I said. Michael reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder. Inside was the document I'd signed 3 months ago, when I was so lost in grief I couldn't think straight. He stared at it for a moment, then slowly tore it in half, then in half again, then again, until it was nothing but pieces of paper scattered across the diner table. There, he said. It's done. And the apology? Dad, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought you needed help. That's not an apology, Michael. That's an excuse. He took a deep breath and looked me straight in the eye for the first time since he'd sat down. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for not asking what you wanted. I'm sorry for treating you like you couldn't make your own decisions. I'm sorry for trying to sell your house without your permission. And I'm sorry for talking to you like you were some kind of burden instead of my father. I nodded. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Now, I said, let's talk about your business associates. Dad, please, I swear to you. I didn't know about the drug money. If you had known, you would have taken their money anyway because you like expensive suits and fancy cars more than you like sleeping with a clear conscience. That's not fair. Fair? I laughed, but there wasn't any humor in it. You want to talk about fair? Is it fair that you used my grief to trick me into signing legal documents? Is it fair that you tried to steal my home? Is it fair that you were going to put me in a nursing home so you could get your hands on $400,000? Michael didn't have an answer for that. Here's what's going to happen, I said. You're going to clean up your business. You're going to stop taking money from people like Tony Marconi and Maria Santos. You're going to become the kind of lawyer your mother would have been proud of. And if I don't? I tapped the envelope with one finger. Then these papers find their way to the FBI, and to Tony Marconi, and to Maria Santos, and you get to explain to all of them why their business arrangements are about to become front-page news. Michael's face went white. Dad, those people, if they think I betrayed them, then you better make sure they never find out, hadn't you? I stood up and put on my coat. Michael, I spent 43 years trying to be the kind of man your mother deserved, the kind of father you needed. But you seem to have forgotten that before I was your dad, I was somebody else entirely. I picked up the envelope and tucked it back inside my jacket. Don't make me remind you who that somebody was. I didn't hear from Michael for 3 days after our meeting at the Riverside Diner. 3 days of silence that told me more about my son than 43 years of family dinners ever had. He wasn't calling to check on me, wasn't stopping by to see how I was doing. He was probably holed up in his fancy office, trying to figure out how to get out of the mess he'd made without losing everything he'd built on dirty money. On the 4th day, Jimmy called. Frank, we might have a problem. What kind of problem? The kind where your son thinks he's smarter than his old man. I've been keeping an eye on him like you asked, and yesterday he had a very interesting visitor at his office. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Who? Eddie Torino, Don Torino's nephew. The one who handles personnel issues for the family these days. Eddie Torino. I remembered him as a kid, maybe 12 years old, always hanging around the edges when his uncle conducted business. Smart kid, but mean. The kind of mean that enjoyed hurting people a little too much. What did they talk about? I couldn't get close enough to hear, but body language tells a story. Your son looked nervous, Eddie looked interested. They talked for about an hour, then Eddie left with something in his jacket pocket. Copies of the evidence. That'd be my guess. Frank, I think your boy just made the stupidest decision of his life. I sat down in Martha's chair by the window and looked out at the neighborhood. Kids were getting home from school, riding their bikes, playing in yards where their parents didn't have to worry about drug money and crime families, and sons who thought they could outsmart everyone. Jimmy? What do you think Michael told Eddie? If I had to guess, he probably told Eddie that someone's been investigating his business connections. Probably said he was being blackmailed by someone who had information about the family's financial arrangements. And Eddie's response? Eddie's response is always the same. Find the problem. Eliminate the problem. Does Michael understand what he's done? I don't think your son understands much of anything right now. I think he's scared and desperate and making the kind of decisions scared, desperate people make. After Jimmy hung up, I sat in that chair for a long time, thinking about the little boy Michael used to be. The kid who cried when he accidentally stepped on a bug. The teenager who brought home stray dogs because he couldn't stand to see anything hurt. When had that boy turned into a man who would put his own father in danger just to save his own skin. Around 6 o'clock, I heard a car pull into my driveway. I looked out the window and saw Michael's BMW, but he wasn't alone. There was another car behind him, a black sedan with tinted windows. Eddie Torino's car. I watched Michael get out and walk toward my front door, his shoulders hunched like he was carrying the weight of the world. Eddie got out of the sedan and followed a few steps behind, his hands in his coat pockets. The doorbell rang, and I took my time answering it. When I opened the door, Michael was standing there looking like he hadn't slept in days. Behind him, Eddie Torino looked exactly like what he was, a professional killer in an expensive suit. "Dad," Michael said, "we need to talk." I figured we might. "Come in." They followed me into the living room. Eddie looked around like he was cataloging everything he saw, probably figuring out the best way to make whatever was about to happen look like an accident. "Dad, I want you to meet Eddie Torino. He's a business associate." "Mr. Williams," Eddie said, his voice smooth as silk. "Michael's told me you have some concerns about his professional relationships." I looked at my son, standing there in my living room next to a man who killed people for a living, and I felt something die inside my chest. Not fear, not anger, just a kind of sad understanding that the little boy who used to cry over dead bugs was gone forever. "Michael," I said, "do you understand what you've done? I've protected us both, Dad. Eddie's here to help resolve this situation." "By resolve, you mean?" Eddie stepped forward, his hand still in his coat pocket. "Mr. Williams, Michael tells me someone's been spreading false information about his business activities. Information that could be very damaging to some very important people. And you want me to tell you who that someone is. I want you to give me whatever evidence you think you have, and I want you to forget you ever saw it." I looked at Eddie, then at Michael, then back at Eddie. "And if I don't?" Eddie's smile was about as warm as a January morning. "Mr. Williams, let's just say that accidents happen to elderly people all the time, especially elderly people who live alone in big houses with lots of stairs." Michael's face went pale when Eddie said that. Like maybe he was just now realizing what kind of people he'd brought into his father's home. "Eddie," I said, "before we go any further, I think there's something you should know about me." "What's that?" I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a business card, yellow with age but still readable. I handed it to Eddie and watched his face change as he read the name. "Frank Williams," I said. "I used to work for your uncle, long time ago." Eddie looked at the card, then at me, then back at the card. "You're that Frank Williams." "I'm that Frank Williams." And for the first time since Michael had walked into my kitchen 4 days ago trying to steal my life, I saw real fear in someone's eyes. But it wasn't in Eddie's eyes. It was in my son's. Eddie Torino looked at that business card like it was a live grenade. He turned it over in his hands, studying every detail, then looked back at me with something that might have been respect or fear. Sometimes, with men like Eddie, those two things look exactly the same. "Frank Williams," he said slowly. "The Frank Williams who saved Uncle Sal's life in the warehouse fire back in '82? That'd be me. The Frank Williams who walked away clean and never asked for anything in return. Also me." Eddie sat down heavily in Martha's favorite chair, the one by the window where she used to read her books in the afternoon sunlight. He was still holding my business card, still staring at it like he couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. "Jesus Christ," he said quietly. "Michael, do you have any idea who your father is?" Michael was standing by the fireplace looking like he was about to be sick. I don't understand." "Your father," Eddie said, "is a fucking legend. Excuse my language, Mr. Williams. But this man right here, your old man, he's the guy every soldier in the family heard stories about when we were coming up." "What stories?" Michael asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Eddie leaned forward, his hands clasped together like he was in church. "You want to know what stories? How about the time your father single-handedly pulled 3 men out of a burning warehouse while the cops and the fire department were still figuring out what to do? How about the time he walked into a room full of angry Russians with nothing but his bare hands and talked them into a peace treaty that lasted 20 years? I watched my son's face as Eddie talked. Watched him realize that everything he thought he knew about his father was wrong. Or, Eddie continued, how about the time Frank Williams had enough evidence to put half the family away for life? But instead of going to the feds, he walked into Don Torino's office and negotiated his own retirement. Clean slate, no questions asked, no looking back. Why would he do that? Michael asked. Eddie looked at me, then back at Michael. Because your father had something most of us never get. He had a woman who loved him and a chance at a real life, and he was smart enough to know the difference between what he wanted and what he deserved. The room got quiet. Outside, I could hear kids playing in the street, normal sounds from a normal world that suddenly felt very far away. Eddie, I said, what did my son tell you about our situation? He said someone was blackmailing him. Said they had information about his business connections that could hurt the family. Said he needed help making the problem go away. And you came here to kill an old man. Eddie had the decency to look embarrassed. Michael said it was some stranger trying to shake him down. He didn't mention it was his father. And he sure as hell didn't mention his father was Frank fucking Williams. I turned to look at my son. Michael, you brought a killer into my home to murder me because I wouldn't let you steal my house. Dad, I thought... You thought what? That I was just some helpless old man you could have eliminated when I became inconvenient? Michael slumped against the fireplace like his legs wouldn't hold him up anymore. I was scared. I was in over my head with the money laundering. And when you showed me those papers, I panicked. So you decided to have me killed. I didn't think it through. I needed the problem to go away. Eddie stood up and walked over to where Michael was standing. For a moment, I thought he might hit him. Instead, he just shook his head. Michael, you stupid son of a bitch. Do you understand what you almost did? Do you understand who you almost had me kill? I'm starting to. Your father is the most respected civilian in the family's history. Men who've been soldiers for 30 years still talk about Frank Williams like he was some kind of saint. And you wanted me to put him in the ground because he wouldn't let you sell his house? Eddie turned back to me. Mr. Williams, I owe you an apology, and I owe you a debt. If there's anything I can do to make this right, there is actually. Name it. I walked over to the window and looked out at the neighborhood where I'd raised my son, where Martha and I had built the only life that ever mattered to me. I want you to make sure Michael understands something. I want you to make sure he understands that the only reason he's still breathing is because he's my son. And I want you to make sure he understands that if he ever tries something like this again, that protection disappears. Consider it done. I turned back to Michael. And I want you to call your uncle. My uncle? Eddie looked confused. Don Torino. I want you to tell him that Frank Williams needs a favor. Tell him it's time to collect on that debt he's owed me for 43 years. Eddie nodded. What kind of favor? The kind that ensures my son never forgets this lesson. The kind that makes sure he spends the rest of his life being the man his mother would have been proud of. I walked over to Michael and looked him straight in the eye. Son, you've got two choices. You can clean up your act, become an honest lawyer, and spend the rest of your life making up for what you tried to do here tonight. Or you can keep playing games with dangerous people and find out what happens when Frank Williams stops protecting you. Michael's voice was barely a whisper. Dad, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Sorry doesn't bring back trust, Michael. Sorry doesn't erase what you were willing to do. But maybe, if you work hard enough, sorry can be the beginning of becoming a better man. Eddie was already on his phone, dialing his uncle's number. In a few minutes, Don Torino would know that Frank Williams was back in the game. Not as a player, but as someone who still commanded respect. And Michael would learn that some debts take a lifetime to repay. Eddie was on the phone for less than 2 minutes, but I could hear Don Torino's voice through the speaker from across the room. When Eddie hung up, he looked at me with something close to awe. He wants to see you. Tonight, at the old restaurant on 5th Street. Gino's? That's the place. He said to tell you it's been too long. I looked at Michael, who was still slumped against the fireplace like a man who just watched his entire world collapse. You're coming with me. Dad, I don't think... I don't care what you think, Michael. You started this mess by bringing these people into our lives. Now you're going to see how it ends." An hour later, the three of us were sitting in the back room of Gino's Italian restaurant, the same place where I used to meet Don Torino 43 years ago when I was young and stupid and thought I knew how the world worked. The restaurant looked exactly the same. Red checkered tablecloths, the smell of garlic and tomato sauce, pictures of the old country covering every inch of the walls. Don Torino walked in at exactly 9 o'clock, and even at 78 years old, he still carried himself like a man who owned everything he could see. His hair was completely white now, and he moved a little slower than he used to, but his eyes were the same. Sharp, calculating, missing nothing. "Frankie Williams," he said, opening his arms like I was his long-lost son. "Look at you, still handsome as hell." "Don Torino," I said, standing up to embrace him. "You look good." "Nah, I look old, but I'm still breathing, which is more than I expected when I hit 70. He sat down across from me and studied Michael with those sharp eyes. "So this is the boy. This is my son, Michael. The one who thought he could use my family to solve his family problems." Michael looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. "Sir, You shut up," Don Torino said quietly. "When I want to hear from you, I'll ask. Right now, I'm talking to your father." He turned back to me. "Frankie, I heard what happened. What your boy tried to do. I gotta tell you, if it was anyone else's kid, we wouldn't be having this conversation. I know. But it's your kid, and you're Frank Williams. So here we are." He leaned back in his chair and lit a cigarette. Even though smoking had been banned in restaurants for 20 years, nobody was going to tell Don Torino where he could smoke. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to make sure my son understands the gravity of what he's done, and I want you to make sure he never forgets it." Don Torino nodded slowly. "Eddie, go wait outside." After Eddie left, Don Torino turned to Michael. "You know what your father did for me?" Eddie mentioned something about a warehouse fire. Eddie doesn't know the half of it. You want to know what really happened? Your father saved my life, yeah, but not from any fire. He saved my life from making the biggest mistake of my career." Don Torino took a long drag from his cigarette. "Back in '82, I was young and angry and thought violence was the answer to every problem. I was about to start a war with the Russians that would have gotten hundreds of people killed and put me in prison for the rest of my life. What stopped you? Your father. He walked into my office with enough evidence to prove that the Russians weren't our enemies, that someone else was playing us against each other, trying to get us to destroy ourselves while they took over our territory." Don Torino looked at me. "You remember what you said to me that day? I said that smart men make peace, stupid men make war. Smart men make peace. Stupid men make war." He turned back to Michael. "Your father could have used that information to destroy both families. Could have gone to the FBI, put everyone in prison, collected a nice reward. Instead, he brought it to me. Helped me make peace. Saved hundreds of lives. I don't understand. You don't understand because you're not your father. Your father thinks about consequences. He thinks about what happens after the immediate problem is solved. You just react. You panic. You make stupid decisions that put people in danger." Don Torino stood up and walked over to where Michael was sitting. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to clean up your business. You're going to stop taking money from people you shouldn't be taking money from. And you're going to spend the rest of your life being worthy of the man who raised you. And if you don't, then your father's protection disappears. And Eddie comes back to finish the conversation you started." Don Torino walked back to his chair and sat down. "But that's not going to happen, is it? Because you're Frank Williams' son, and Frank Williams didn't raise a complete idiot." He looked at me. "Frankie, is there anything else you need? Just one thing. I want you to make sure word gets around about what happened here tonight. I want everyone to know that Frank Williams is still someone who commands respect. Consider it done." Don Torino stood up and put on his coat. "And Frankie, if you ever need anything at all, you call. The debt I owe you doesn't have an expiration date." After he left, Michael and I sat alone in that back room, surrounded by 43 years of history and choices and consequences. "Dad," Michael said finally, "I had no idea who you were." "No," I said. "You had no idea who you were. You're my son, Michael. That used to mean something. It's going to mean something again." I stood up and put on my coat. "We're going home, and tomorrow you're going to start becoming the man your mother would have been proud of." "How do I do that?" "One choice at a time, son. One choice at a time." Outside, it was starting to snow. The first snow of the season, covering the city in clean white that made everything look new. Like maybe if we were lucky, we could start over. Like maybe it wasn't too late for my son to become the man I'd always hoped he could be. 6 months later, I was sitting in my kitchen having my morning coffee when Michael knocked on my front door. Not the arrogant walk-in like he owned the place that had started this whole mess. A real knock. A respectful knock. The kind of knock that asked permission instead of demanding entry. "Morning, Dad," he said when I opened the door. He was wearing jeans and a regular shirt instead of one of those expensive suits. He looked tired, but it was a different kind of tired. The kind that comes from honest work instead of sleepless nights worrying about federal investigations. "Michael, come in." He followed me to the kitchen and sat down at the same table where 6 months ago he'd told me I didn't have a choice about my own life. This time, he waited until I offered him coffee before he said anything. "I wanted to update you on some things," he said, wrapping his hands around the coffee cup like he was trying to warm himself up. "I closed the offshore accounts, all of them. I returned the money that could be traced back to questionable sources. How much did that cost you?" "About $2 million, plus my partnership at the firm. Turns out, when you stop taking dirty money, law firms don't find you quite as valuable. And now? Now I'm working for Legal Aid, helping people who can't afford lawyers, making about 1/10 of what I used to make, living in an apartment that's smaller than my old office." He took a sip of coffee and looked around the kitchen. "But I sleep better at night. What about Tony Marconi and Maria Santos? They found other lawyers. Lawyers who don't ask as many questions as I started asking. Don Torino made it clear that my transition was in everyone's best interest." I nodded. Don Torino was a man of his word. When he said Michael would be protected during his career change, he meant it. But that protection came with the understanding that Michael's old life was over forever. "There's something else," Michael said. "I've been going to therapy, trying to understand how I became the kind of person who would do what I tried to do. And what did you learn? I learned that somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing you as my father and started seeing you as an obstacle. I learned that I got so caught up in money and status that I forgot what really mattered." He looked up at me, and for the first time in years, I saw something in his eyes that reminded me of the little boy he used to be. "I learned that I almost lost the most important person in my life because I was too arrogant to ask for help. Why didn't you just talk to me, Michael? If you were in trouble, if you needed money, why didn't you just ask? Because asking would have meant admitting I'd made mistakes, and I was too proud to admit that the successful lawyer's son had screwed up his life. Pride's a dangerous thing, son. It makes you think you're smarter than you are and stronger than you are." "Yeah, I figured that out. The hard way." We sat there in comfortable silence for a while, drinking our coffee and listening to the sounds of the neighborhood waking up. Kids getting ready for school, people heading to work. All the normal sounds of normal people living normal lives. "Dad, can I ask you something?" "Shoot." "When you worked for the Torino family, did you ever regret it? Did you ever wish you'd made different choices?" I thought about that for a minute. "Every choice I made before I met your mother led me to her. Every mistake, every bad decision, every moment I'm not proud of. They all put me in the right place at the right time to meet the woman who changed my life. So no, I don't regret it. But I'm glad I was smart enough to walk away when I found something better. Do you think I can do that? Walk away and find something better? I think you already did. You walked away from the money laundering. You walked away from the criminal clients. You walked away from a life that was going to destroy you. Now you just have to keep walking in the right direction." Michael finished his coffee and stood up to leave. "Dad, I know I can't undo what I did. I know I can't take back the fact that I tried to have you killed. But I want you to know that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to become the man you and Mom deserved to raise. Michael, you want to know something? The fact that you're trying, the fact that you recognize what you did wrong and you're working to fix it, that tells me the man your mother and I raised is still in there somewhere. Thanks, Dad. After he left, I sat back down at my kitchen table and looked around the house that had almost been stolen from me. The house where Martha and I had built our life together. The house where we'd raised our son, made our mistakes, learned our lessons, and loved each other for 47 years. This morning, for the first time since Martha died, the house didn't feel empty. 6 months ago, my son had walked into this kitchen and told me he was selling my home and putting me in a nursing home. He'd treated me like I was nothing more than an inconvenience in his plans to get rich. Today, my son had knocked on my door, asked permission to enter, and told me he was trying to become a better man. Respect, I've learned, isn't something you demand. It's something you earn. And sometimes, when you've lost it, it's something you have to fight to get back. My boy had a long way to go, but he was walking in the right direction. And sometimes, that's enough. Sometimes, that's everything. So let me ask you something, my friend. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done? Would you have rolled over and let your own flesh and blood steal your life away? Or would you have reminded them that just because a man gets older doesn't mean he gets weaker? Tell me what you think. And let me know what city you're listening from, because stories like this, well, they happen everywhere. But it's how we handle them that shows who we really are.